Welcome everybody to OBIC's Open Banking Insight Series. I'm your host, Michelle Beyo, CEO and founder of Finavator, as well as an OBIC board member. I am really excited for today's discussion of our Open Banking Insight Series, as we're going to be highlighting the importance of cybersecurity in an open banking framework. We'll be examining any cyber risks that are facing the UK and Canada today, as well as we'll be discussing open banking and how it can drive opportunity for stronger security for not only banks, fintechs, but also consumers. Through the combination of both market and action, the government legislation in the UK has been a leader globally in open banking by launching in January 2018. And through that, they have actually driven a very important movement where consumers in the UK have automated many of their recurring transactions in their daily lives while gaining and maintaining higher security and privacy over their personal data. In terms of adoption, in January 2021, marked 2.5 million using open banking with 303 regulated providers. And open banking API call volume has moved in the UK from 66.8 million in 2018 to nearly 6 billion in 2020. I'd like to start by introducing our distinguished moderator as well as panelists. The Honourable Senator Deacon is an independent senator representing Nova Scotia. Senator Deacon has a unique entrepreneurial background and has focused on enabling collaboration between research, business, and a strong advocacy for innovation and consumer data rights. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today.
Really glad to be here, Michelle, and especially for this conversation.
Yes, I think it's going to be an exciting one. Also, very happy to introduce our two expert Chief Information Security Officers. Representing Canada, we have Joseph Lau, the CISO for Sagard, as well as Portage. And representing the UK, we have Alan Osborne, who is the CISO and EVP of PaySafe. I would like to start today by having both Joseph and Alan share a brief intro on their career, their current role, and some insights on their company. Passing it over to you, Joseph.
Thanks, Michelle. So as you just stated, I'm the CISO for Sagard Holdings, dual-hatted for Portage Ventures. So Sagard's a multi-strategy alternative asset manager. So what does that mean? We invest in a lot of different asset classes. So venture capital through Portage, venture building through Diagram, and we also do private equity and private credit. And Sagard also has a healthcare royalties program as well. We have offices around the world, and it's a very dynamic and quickly growing company. I'd say one of the best parts of my job is working directly with Fintechs. It's really, really fun, and it's such a dynamic environment. And we actually have a global scale, so we actually have investments everywhere. A little bit about my background. So I spent over 19 years and 3 months, according to my superannuation statement, in federal government at the Communications Security Establishment and then the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. My last role prior to joining Sagard was as the head of critical infrastructure, where I worked with telco, finance, energy, healthcare, and transportation partners to improve their cybersecurity at a national level. That's sort of like the opposite of my current job, where before I was dealing with huge companies, with in many cases multinationals, and now I deal with companies when I'm wearing my Portage hat with, let's say, 10 to our bigger companies would have, let's say, a couple hundred people. So the problem's the same. The threats are similar. The scale is different, but I actually truly believe that fintechs and startups can be just as secure as large enterprises. So with that, I'll just hand it over to you, Alan.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Alan Osborne. I'm Chief Information Security Officer for PaySafe Group. I have spent the last 25 years in security. I may not look that old, but believe it or not, I am. And this is my third CISO role now. So I guess I've always been in technology, always been in security before security really became a bigger thing, I suppose. I've worked in vendors, in consulting, and in financial services, just really being responsible, more and more responsible and more technical, I suppose, with responsibility around security strategy, approach, and design. And so my three CISO roles were WorldPay, so another big payment organization, and I was involved in their IPO and a sort of big growth story before it was acquired by Vantiv and now by FIS. And I was at National Grid, which is really provides the backbone of gas and electricity transmission through to the UK, but also the transmission and distribution to a large portion of the East US as well for gas and electricity. So a lot of involvement in the critical national infrastructure, a lot of involvement with the government and regulators there. So really good experience. And then, as I say, about 18 months now in PaySafe Group. PaySafe Group is really built with a number of specialized payment services. So it covers payment processing. So the sort of transaction processing you might do either on a website or in face-to-face payments. But also we have a couple of digital wallets platforms, notably Skrill and Netella. And we have an e-cash, so PaySafe card, PaySafe Cash, which is an e-cash system allowing the underbanked and movement of real money into digital money that could be used for gaming and what have you.
Thank you so much, Alan. And I really appreciate that you have the UK lens, but also that PaySafe's origin is out of Montreal. So we have a vision from both sides of the fence in the UK and in Canada. And I'd like to pass it over to Senator Deacon to start our first questions.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Joseph and Alan. This is a really important conversation to me. And I just want to give you a little bit of perspective. When we started our consultations with experts on open banking in the Senate Banking, Trade and Commerce Committee in February 2 years ago. So this is, we were late to the game then. Canada remains on the starting line. We were on the starting line then. The world is racing ahead. But it was interesting. I just want to mentioned 3 things that the Canadian Bankers Association, when we asked them to testify, said were top priorities on this issue. And 1 was consumer protection, 2 was privacy and confidentiality and security of data. 3rd was financial crime, money laundering and anti-money laundering and fraud. And 4th was financial stability. And I was really intrigued at those 4 points because there was a definite assumption that our system as it stood already had perfected and was on the cutting edge of those issues. And I, coming from a tech world, didn't agree with that perspective. That there's an assumption that new entrants are inherently riskier than incumbents, especially in a world where technology changes are happening so rapidly. So I wanted to provide that framing before we entered into our conversation, because I really want to get help in building my arguments to say, no, we've got a lot of work to do here. And we've got to make some big changes in order to make sure that Canadians are protected in ways that the Canadian Bankers Association said are really crucial. So Joseph, maybe if you could just speak to me from the perspective of Portage. Portage is clearly one of the biggest investors in this space in Canada, has assets globally in the space. And in terms of bringing the open banking opportunity to Canadians, I've got my perspective on what the biggest challenge is. What do you think it is?
So I would actually touch on maybe taking a big step back and looking at the problem globally, particularly around financial crime and fraud. So what are we talking about there? Well, we're preventing very bad people from stealing money to do very bad things. We're talking about a lot of the times these criminal groups are affiliated with human trafficking, narco trafficking, in some cases nation states that are actually targeting nuclear proliferation. Like these people that are stealing the money are not good people. And that's really what we're trying to prevent here in terms of our anti-fraud efforts. If you look globally, the estimate for 2021 is this is going to have a worldwide cost of $6 trillion. That's trillion with a T. By 2025, that's supposed to grow to 10.5 trillion. This is a big worldwide problem. So for people to say, we have this solved. We absolutely do not have this solved in Canada. We don't have this solved at a global level. This is a real problem, and we absolutely need to get better.
And I was looking at some data in terms of AML success in the world, and my understanding is that the estimates right now in terms of our ability to capture criminal money flows are about 0.02% or 0.2% in that range. It's minuscule. I mean, this is a system that's working really well for the bad guys.
100%. And I jokingly say I'd be a pretty good criminal because I see a lot of the things that happen, and we're not catching so much of the easy low-hanging fruit that is out there. Absolutely. So can we get better? I 100% believe that. And I think if we look at, like, from a Canadian perspective, something we can pat ourselves on the back with, we have a huge success story out of St. John's, Newfoundland, Verifin, which was acquired by NASDAQ for 2.75 billion USD, which is
3.6 Canadian.
There we go. 3.6 Canadian. So we can actually contribute on a scale, at scale, and actually have a global impact in Canada. And I'm going to sort of
make money while we're doing it.
And exactly.
Create jobs, opportunity, and wealth.
And can we use open banking as one of the levers? That fast follower, that train's already left, right? But can we actually use it as a lever for us to get out of this pandemic? It's had a very, very negative impact on the global economy, but in Canada as well. And if we want to say that Canada is an information economy, we have to figure out how to securely and safely allow data to be used to innovate. And that's what this comes down to. We have so many smart Canadians. We have so many great universities. How do we keep that talent in Canada? Like, let's talk about the fact that 1 in 4 Canadians goes down to the US to work, after, like STEM graduates. That's embarrassing. That's atrocious. Why can't we build those great companies in Canada, right? Like, we have a handful of success stories. We can build great companies. Yep. Shopify, like patting myself on the back from an Ottawa perspective, I'm very proud of Shopify, $141 billion market cap US, right? Like, we can build juggernauts if we actually keep our talent in Canada. If we prioritize it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Just so I don't believe that we have this solved, and I think it's really a matter of the big banks working with fintechs and people that have unique approaches to make everybody a lot safer.
Make the whole system a lot safer and all Canadians a lot safer. Alan, from the perspective of the PaySafe Group, and the changes that have happened due to COVID. I mean, the world's digitized. The estimates are the pace of a year for every month of the COVID pandemic, that we've accelerated. There was an inflection point caused by COVID. How has that created new risks and new issues for you to address as throughout your group? Has that been something that you could provide some comments on?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think we did see there was a shift in the threat landscape, if you like. And I think, just to sort of add on to what Joseph said as well. I mean, I think this feels like a topic, an area that never really gets solved. You always feel like there is always something better to do, something better to fix. And so, you're constantly looking to adapt your defensive mechanisms and how and what the attackers are doing and how to face against them. So. For us, it was the COVID pandemic was really initially was very much about the shift to remote working and operating in a different way and thinking about things like insider threat. How does that profile change when you're no longer in the office together, working together on various things? And really, what we saw in March of 2020 was this sort of huge change in the threat landscape. We did see a lot more attacks against phishing and account takeovers and credential stuffing and just a real onslaught of attacks. And I wouldn't say that the complexity changed or the mechanisms or threat as such changed. It's just the volume of it really was what we found. So it's been sort of an interesting year, I think, in trying to adapt to that, making sure that we're trying to outthink the bad guys all the time, come up with new ways to tackle those risks, and just to keep one step ahead, really.
And it really intrigues me. Your title was Chief Security Officer, now Chief Information Security Officer, and I just look at the growth of the value of data. So that over the last number of years, and the importance of keeping people safe, and how reputations of organizations can be absolutely destroyed in a very short period of time, if you two don't do your jobs right. And that's a lot of weight that you're carrying, as these, when the actors are already so successful, so the bad actors, so already so well funded, uh, and once a bunch of them start targeting you, it must be um, a sleepless period, and constantly in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the old, it is quite an old cliche, I'm afraid, but we always talk about the attackers only need to get lucky once. We have to get lucky all of the time, you know. And I think really it's a free of charge activity. And I think the other thing that we always say is we get a free pen test every day. So we've always got somebody attacking the environment, trying to look for a way in, and we've obviously got to cover all of that. So I mean, there is a lot of pressure, and you quite rightly point out that you know, PaySafe as an example is built on its reputation. It's built on the confidence that the customers have in the brand and in the platforms they're using. They're entrusting you with their data, in some cases personal data, in some cases financial data, and therefore if you have significant events and that becomes quite well known in the media, which you know, there's a lot more pressure now to be public about these things as well, it can have a massive impact on you know, on the revenue, because people will lose trust in the brand, and they won't want to do it. And we're not short of other companies to go to. So
Well, that's it. You live in a world where you have data portability in the UK, where your customers can be gone within seconds.
Absolutely.
We don't yet have that in Canada. So there's maybe a little bit of comfort in incumbent organizations that there's a stickiness that's there. Joseph, can you just speak a little bit about how there might need to be justified to be a regulatory response to these increasing threats? And the fact that we have got many of our basic systems in this country, from the federal government and provincial governments, hospitals, and our banks and financial institutions, others, that are built on very old technology foundations. And those foundations, those legacy systems, have a challenge associated with them that I think I'd love to get your insights and ways to help us, people like me, who are not an expert, that don't have your background that you and Alan have, some insights into those risks and how regulators might need to respond.
Absolutely. So I'll sort of set the stage by saying that globally, there's a worldwide shortage of cybersecurity experts. World Economic Forum says somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 million job openings. So I should be employed for the foreseeable future, I hope. And I also think the bad guys are going to keep on doing bad things. But so there's this global cybersecurity shortage of talent overall. And we have to also look at it from the attacker side, which essentially what they're running is a business, right? They're always going for the highest rate of return with a minimal effort. So it's actually not even about being the absolute best world leader in cybersecurity. It's just being slightly above average, so you're not targeted. That's the bottom line in terms of most people's investment. So if we look at this within a Canadian context, do we need more regulation? That's a very loaded question. We already have some regulations in Canada, but then the question is, well, if we have regulations, what standard are we going to adhere to? If you look at all of the large cyber breaches that have happened over every day, all those companies, particularly the big ones, they actually followed some type of large international certification, whether it's ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, PCI DSS, et cetera. They all have these certifications, and they're still getting compromised. So really, what is the standard that you're going to have the government set as the regulation is very difficult. I think the other thing
I guess it would be always changing as well. It has to keep evolving. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's really the threat landscape is constantly evolving. Now, if I have, let's say, Senator Deacon, a 30-minute speech you put on the internet, I can put it through commercially available software, and I can have you say whatever I want. That's that deep fake voice technology, right? It would be very easy for me to fake your telephone number as well. So I can have Senator Deacon calling from a number that looks like his actual number, saying ridiculous things, right? So fraud is really, really, the changes are happening all the time. I think what we need to do though, and where we could have a regulatory regime that makes more sense is, then this goes back to data, is information sharing on cyber threats. Can we actually work with each other? Because we know that the attackers are, to share information. One thing that's lacking in Canada is safe harbor legislation in terms of information sharing. They have that in the United States, we don't, right? So if we can figure out a way for both small fintechs and large FIs to openly share cyber threat information, so we can maybe be a good neighbor to each other and protect each other and share that information, that's what I would like to see within a regulatory framework. In terms of saying you have to have this specific technology and so forth, I don't know, right? There's basic hygiene that people can put on, make sure that your employees have cybersecurity awareness training, multi-factor authentication, good passwords, things like that, absolutely, right? But is that something that the government can play a big space in? I don't know. And I think if you look at Canada in terms of how our economy is structured, we're all small and medium enterprises, largely. A lot of them can't afford all this fancy cyber technology. And I actually challenge, does cybersecurity really need to be super expensive? Or can we actually simplify it?
Yeah, I think those points are really, for me, really important, because we've got to look at this issue. It is pervasive, it is increasing, and it's ever changing. And so we have to look at it in a disruptive manner. We cannot look at it through a traditional lens and expect a very different result. Alan, I'd really be interested in your perspective from an economy that has really been leading in this change towards open banking, or what we're now calling in Canada consumer-directed finance. Um, what have been the big lessons learned from your standpoint, and how well have they have the changes that have been made in the UK served organizations like yours and your customers during this rapid change of COVID? How well has this all worked from your standpoint in terms of protecting consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's forever changing. So you're always adapting and trying to take that step ahead. I mean, the program that we have in place from a security perspective around the protection and improvement of our controls and giving confidence to customers that we're dealing with their data correctly and managing it in a successful way that makes them feel good about using our services is constantly changing. We're always looking for ways to make it easy to work with, but still giving that sense that there is confidence to be had in there. So I think for us, we always think about risk and customer experience. So we're looking at that the friction and security balance that we need to make. So
I like that analogy a lot, though, that you don't want frictionless, because it's frictionless for the bad guys as well as the good guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And I think we do want payments to go through seamlessly. We want it to be nice and easy, and not a painful process. And we've all been through those painful processes with various financial institutions. But so there is a balance to be struck there, which is quite difficult in just giving a little bit of friction and allowing it to happen, nice and easily. But for in all these cases, I think it's important to think about risk, to think about where your money is best spent. Where do you spend your time and effort on security controls? What's the biggest risk to the environment? Where do we start to shore up the defenses first? And there's the area of cybersecurity is just so far and wide. It's very difficult to really know where you should focus, we can talk about sort of ways in which to approach that if you like, but having that broad sense of all the things that you should do to do all the right things for the customer, all the right things for the data, and all the right things for environment to maintain the reputation is just a constant challenge and changing all the time.
Yeah. So when I look to bring it back to fintechs in Canada, And the fact that we've got some tremendous fintechs. I don't know how many Canadians right now are currently using screen scraping in order to access the services that are the only way to get them is through screen scraping at this point, because there's been such reluctance to move towards a standardized API across our country. And I would love to know why that reluctance exists, because consumers are not being served by it. Canadians generally are not being served by it. But what would you give me right now, Joseph, as sort of the top 3 or 4 things that as a parliamentarian, speaking to other parliamentarians, where I need to focus my attention based on current realities? I mean, not our perception, which I think so often is incorrect, but based on the current realities in the Canadian landscape and around global threats. Where do we need to focus our attention? What are the top 1, 2, or 3 things that where our attention needs to be focused?
I can actually sort of encapsulate the whole concept in maybe an example of one of the companies that we have in our portfolio, which is Wealthsimple. So one of the most common things that we hear about all the times in the news is there was this cyber breach. Okay, so there's 10 million user accounts stolen, 100 million, 500 million was the recent, 533 million something for Facebook, right? We hear about all these things happening, and obviously that's a terrible thing. But how do you limit the blast radius or the damage from that? And it has to do with the fact that people need to be educated more, and that would be things like using a password manager or not using the same password everywhere, right? So like usually in a large forum, I'll ask like who reuses their password, and there's a large number of people that will raise their hand, right? So when we look at going back to the Wealthsimple example, let's say there was a large cyber breach of that was publicly disclosed, like Facebook or Marriott. What you'll see for a lot of banks and a lot of financial institutions is what they call credential stuffing, where they try to reuse those same user names and passwords against the platform. So this goes to the agility of startups. Wealthsimple, in the space of 72 hours, less than 72 hours, was able to enforce for all of their million-plus users multi-factor authentication. And what that allows people to do is actually block anybody that's trying to reuse those passwords, and it forces them to actually just move on to another target. As I mentioned before, these hackers use this as a business model, right? If it's too hard to break into one system, they'll go on to the next one.
The police say that about break-ins to homes. Just make your house more difficult than the next one.
Exactly, and they'll move on. So I would say that it's that agility there and actually challenging some of those assumptions. None of the big 6 banks in Canada enforce or make it mandatory for people to use two-factor authentication. None of them, right? And part of the fallacy there is, oh, it'll be too much user friction, or people, no. And I think that's one of the advantages of fintechs, and that's why all of the big 6 banks actually have a VC arm that invests in fintechs, because they want to be able to test out their theses or test things if there's actually a demand for things in a relatively safe way. And that's why they invest in startups. I guess the last point I would say about open banking around this is fintechs in Canada are really resilient. I'm really proud of a lot of the companies that we have in our portfolio or in Canada, period. And we're doing this in spite of not having open banking. And we will get there. We'll figure it out. It'll just probably be a lot more painful. But if we had open banking, it would certainly act as an accelerant. And obviously, we're not going to be fast followers because the rest of the world already has 2 or 3 years already a head start, right? But we can actually learn from the other schemes from those other countries and actually make one that we might need to revise a lot less than other countries. So on a positive note, I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned there.
And we definitely have to iterate. I think that's somewhere the world is changing so rapidly that with whatever legislative changes we put in place, we have to be prepared to iterate and not be scared of that. I mean, not think that we're planning the next legislative change for the next 30 years. It's we got to be comfortable with that. In terms of your recommendations to Canada, Alan, I'm sure in the UK you just sort of say keep things as they are, folks. We don't need any more competition. We want to stay as the leaders in the UK, but just given that you've got some Canadian heritage in your company, and what are your recommendations to us to try and get get us on the right road and moving at pace? What would be your recommendations to us in terms of open banking and how we need to start to proceed?
That's a big and difficult question. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this is all built on trust, isn't it? And it's built on explaining and getting a common understanding as to the benefits of doing this, and what benefits it could bring to you, what risks it would reduce. Now, it's probably easier said than done, I suspect, because I think giving access to data is always seen, you know, potentially as allowing an opportunity for the attackers to get in and make you know, make hay on the information they can get. But I think.
But I think, as we've discussed, that risk is there already, and it's not necessarily, the status quo is not protecting that any more than a change. It does not seem to me.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think it's just sort of explaining that by giving access to that data, to a greater set of data, that you can do more thorough authorization, more fraud checks. You can limit the amount of damage that can be done, and we can make more informed decisions on the, you know, the loans and investments and money movements that we make. And it's, you know, it's really just you're just helping. I think in this case, you're helping the good guys as well as the bad guys, you know, potentially, because you're making the data more accessible, so you can make more informed decisions and manage the risks. But I think there's lots of mitigations for those risks. I think, you know, as we talked about, if you just open it up a bit, there is lots of control activity that you can put in place to make sure that only the right people have access to the right data. And as you mentioned before, I mean, personal data, financial data is absolutely really of paramount importance to people. You know, it's something that you have to protect, that you have to, the companies have to give confidence that they're going to manage successfully. And I think the technologies are there to do it. There's lots of mechanisms to do this and manage it well. And I'm sort of just thinking back to, you know, the example that Joseph gave, that, you know, even the technology is an iterative thing as well. I think as you discover different vulnerabilities to that, you can still iterate your controls and close down the gaps. You know, the example you gave around two-factor authentication, you know, in my experience, I've also seen, even when you put two-factor authentication in place, the bad guys find a way around that. They find a way of mimicking the website. So it looks like you're going to the legitimate website, and the website is prompting you for the second factor authentication, maybe an SMS message, and they're managing to get people to input that into the website as well. And so then you need just to think of the next control. How do I overcome that? And you know, as in security, you're always trying to outthink the bad guys. You're always trying to get one step ahead. And sometimes you start from being one step behind, but hopefully you've got the resources to
I think if we don't recognize that we're already one step behind of the bad actors in how we design our systems, we're putting ourselves at risk. I'm really struck by the fact that if we're standing still in this world right now, we're increasing our risks. And that's what really is concerning me. I'm concerned about the cost of keeping up with when you're building from a legacy system. That you know, I think a lot of fintechs have the opportunity of having a thinner slice potentially, but a newer platform. And I look as well in terms of, as I look forward, the opportunity to use AI to look at your past practices in terms of payments and other activities and say, hey, this isn't making sense. This isn't aligning. There could be something bad that's happening here as an early alert system when a bad guy has breached. That we've got to start to bring some of these things to consumers to make sure that we live up to those 4 points that I mentioned earlier that are priorities, stated priorities by the Canadian Bankers Association, and I think are important priorities, but are not necessarily, and I certainly have heard that from the two of you, are not necessarily being at all well served by the status quo. And so I just want to say thank you to you and thank you to Michelle. I'll leave you with one last thought, and I'd love just to have your responses and sort of your final thoughts. But Scott Farrell, who has been a leader in Australia in this space and certainly is admired by a lot of folks, including me, he spoke about something where your CEO, Joseph Adam Faleski, says that the new oil is data, the value of data. But I love what Scott Farrell said. He said it's actually uranium because it's incredibly powerful, but it's also very dangerous if mishandled. And I think that is an important analogy, and I think it fits with what I've heard from the two of you today. So just, if I could, Alan and then Joseph, just final thoughts, and as we hand things back to Michelle.
Yeah.
And thank you again.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me. And I think, so my final thoughts on the data. I mean, there's the huge investment now in security data lakes. Thinking about, we have so much information that we need to pull together and make sense of. And so, I completely agree that this is really a big part of the future, interpreting that data using advanced technologies, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, and those things that we've been talking about for so long, to give us much more telemetry on what is a legitimate transaction, what is a fraudulent transaction, thinking about user behaviors and actions and geographic regions and devices, and trying to pull all of that information telemetry together so that we can make sort of better decisions. I completely agree that will form really the future in this area.
Joseph, final thoughts?
So one point that I just really wanted to emphasize why I personally feel open banking is so important is that it really opens up innovation to help provide financial services to help marginalized and underserved or underbanked individuals. So I'm going to give you just really one quick example of another one of the companies, Coho, and they have something called the Credit Builder service. And that actually helps people that are perhaps in a rough situation, or they've had life changes or family changes. And this is a service that actually allows them to increase their credit score. And this is in the absence of open banking, right? So if you and your other senators and the members of parliament can really focus on how do we use this as a lever for Canada, and we can actually do much more of that type of innovation and provide financial services for Canadians at a reasonable cost, right? I think that's it. And then from a venture capital point of view, right? We're always raising new funds across Sagard. I'd love for more of those funds to be invested in Canada instead of globally, right? That's wearing my Canadian hat, like Maple Leaf on my heart. Like, can we find good Canadian companies that are focused on solving real problems?
Hallelujah. Couldn't agree more. Great way to end. Michelle, you probably have a final question or two that you want to ask, and I got it. I'm sorry I went over time, but it just was a great conversation, Alan and Joseph. And Michelle, thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. I think it is such an important discussion. I think to the point you made, Senator Deacon, at the beginning, that it's been emphasized in Canada that cyber risk of doing open banking is so great. And I think Joseph, before we started recording, was sharing, how that isn't actually the case. I like to highlight the point that in the UK, at 1 million screen scraping, in 2018, open banking became an initiative to help UK citizens to be protected and control their own data, so that instead of having a screen scrape across your entire data set, that they were able to just justify, I want my name, my address, and whatever is needed to open this account, and then I want it back, or I want the revoking rights to take it back. And I think what's happening in Canada, hitting 4 million recorded in 2019 using screen scraping to access services that are cheaper, more efficient, and more AI driven, like Wealthsimple, like Wave, infrastructure that is needed by Canadian SMEs as well as Canadians, but then having those services, not be up 99.9% of the time. They're actually up only 80% of the time because screen scraping goes down. There is not a secure way for me to just share as a business owner what I need to get my accounting done. I have to share everything. And I think it's a human right for Canadians to have, just like Australians and people in Singapore and UK and Mexico and Brazil and so many other countries, they have the right to control their data so that they're not leaving a treasure trove of data for cyber risk by doing screen scraping just to access the services that are helping them save money. So I think I go back to Joseph to share, do you believe that, maybe this is my point, I believe the biggest risk in open banking is not facilitating open banking when every other Commonwealth has made the initiative for their citizens to be protected and have their rights. But it seems like we've been told a narrative in Canada that cyber risk is the biggest risk of open banking. But I would love your thoughts on that, Joseph, and maybe Alan, and we'll close it off there because I know we're over time.
Cyber risk is certainly, for the financial sector at large, the largest risk, right? There's a lot of well-funded threat actors that are trying to steal money, as we had said earlier, to do some very bad things. But I agree with you 100%. To say that this is a fintech problem or a startup problem is simply not true. There are fintechs that are just as secure as any of the big 6 banks.
Yeah, and can you share your analogy about houses? Because I really think it's an important analogy to share for people to understand why fintechs are secure and why their goal is to only have the data they need to do the business they would like to offer.
Sure, absolutely. So if you look at some of the older houses out there, let's say they were built in the 50s or 60s, they were not built to current codes. And if you try to get them to be energy efficient, it's very, very difficult. So in that context, if you look at the larger financial institutions, they have a combination, a hybrid combination of both on-premise or physical servers that they house in their data centers, and then being on the cloud. If we look at new construction, they're built to code, they're a lot more energy efficient, and fintechs have that greenfield to build entirely on the cloud. And then we can partner with large organizations, whether it's Amazon or Google or Apple, in terms of making sure that we've offloaded some of that security risk over to them, and that has been done at scale, and we know that it's relatively secure. So if we look overall at cyber risk, I would say that it's a fallacy that fintechs are not secure. And I think that also that but you can't, the nuance there is cyber risk is definitely the largest risk for the financial sector at large.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. And Alan, when we come to the UK, knowing that it was mandated for the banks to move into this space of consumer-directed finance, has that helped them innovate their cybersecurity and some of that old infrastructure that Joseph was speaking to?
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. It's, you know, the risk is, you know, so great that you tend to get a lot of support and guidance from the large, you know, from the senior management team. You get finance and support to actually deliver those. So, you know, I think that's absolutely right. There is from what Joseph was saying, I mean, I think not only is the challenge perhaps a little bit easier for fintechs to not to deal with so much legacy and history, but also I think that the agility is there in the smaller companies. I think they have the ability to jump a little bit quicker and to make those changes a bit quicker. They're not sort of steeped in so much history and process, and I think they are able to make change a little bit quicker as well.
Yeah, thank you. This has been such a great discussion. I'm so happy that we got to, within our series, really get into the in-depths of cybersecurity as we try and help Canada move forward towards giving our citizens the rights to their own data. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having this be shared and for having more questions to help us move forward. So thank you so much, Senator Deacon, Joseph, and Alan, for joining us.
Thanks to you all. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.